Sahana Vavatu, Sahano Bhunaktu, Sahavidyan Karavavahai, Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Chaitanyam Sarvagam Sarvam Sarvabhutaguhashayam Yat Sarva Vishayatitam Tasmai Sarvavide Namaha. Very good. Welcome to you all. I think we have a Mother's Day. Of course, many blessings to all mothers. And I think many of our students are having some celebration with their mothers this morning, which is nice. And welcome also to the many students who are regularly attending these classes online. We continue today with our study of Upadesha Sahasri. Remember when we began this?
Is it?
Oh, this one I forgot. Too many things to turn on. Thank you. Let me turn this one on. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Good. Thank you. Remember when we started this current chapter, chapter 16, we're now taking selected verses. There are many verses in the current chapter that are highly technical descriptions of Sankhya Darshana, of Nyaya Vaisheshika Darshana, and of Shunyavada and Kshanika Vijnanavada. And unless you've studied all these thoroughly, the text is not very enjoyable. However, whatever we leave out, first of all, I'll tell you what we're leaving out. You can study it independently. And also, immediately after those sections, what we'll see today is Shankara picks up the thread. So you end up getting the essence of whatever technical part we skipped over. In my opinion, you don't miss out much by leaving those sections in. And if we kept those sections in, I think you'd find this not very accessible. Okay, so with that, we continue. There's an interesting scenario with the next two verses. Let me turn this on. All right. With the next two verses, you know, we often in Advaita Vedanta texts will give a drishtanta, a metaphor, followed by the darshtanta, that which the metaphor represents. In the next two verses, the darshtanta comes first, and the drishtanta comes in the next verse. So it kind of makes sense to take the verses out of order. The verses are actually one long sentence, so in this case it makes sense to take, we're going to see verses 19 and 20, but we'll do it in the reverse order. Nimilon miline stane, Nimilon miline stane, Vayavete na chakshushaha, Vayavete na chakshushaha, Prakashatvan manasyevam, Prakashastvan manasyevam, Buddhau nasta prakashataha, Buddhau nasta prakashakaha. Before we see the verse, the general topic we're seeing right now is Shankara wants to establish the fact that Atma is a karta, not an agent of action. We'll see three verses on this topic and also explain at the end why that's so significant that Atma should be a karta. So here he is giving a drishtanta based, here we have another challenge, a drishtanta based on the ancient world view of human anatomy. And so he starts out talking about the chakshus, the eyes. So according to this ancient world view, eyesight is a subtle power, different from your physical eyeball. So we have, in order to understand the metaphor, we have to understand the ancient worldview and that is chakshus is not your eyeball, but rather it is the power of sight. With that in mind, he says, interesting observation, he says that nelimina, nemila, unmila. Nemila is opening your eyes. Closing your eyes. Nemila is closing your eyes. Unmila, that's why I'm confused. Because the word comes, they drop in the compound, it changes. It's nemilana, the full word. And unmilana, the first na drops. I'm not even sure why. Anyway, forget all the grammatical details here. Closing and opening the eyes. Sthane, in this situation where your eyes are opened and closed, those actions of te, in the second line, those actions of opening and closing your eyes, na chakshushaha, don't belong to your eyes, don't belong to your power of sight. Now it makes more sense, right? So opening and closing your eyes is a physical act. It's not part of the act of seeing. Even modern times, we know, the nerves that control your eyelids going up and down are completely different from the nerves, part of the optic nerve and that whole optic path inside your brain. These are completely different even in modern science. So here he says very significantly that they are vayave. Vayu, wind, here means prana. So your eyes open and close due to the power of prana, and opening and closing your eyes is not a power of your eyes, a power of eyesight. And we'll see in just this is a drishtanta, so let's finish the drishtanta, and then the darshtanta will make so much more sense. So he says, prakashatvat, because your power of eyesight is an instrument of revealing, prakasha. So let's say an instrument of knowledge would be a better way. You know things with your eyes. You experience things. You obviously see things with your eyes. The power of sight then is a power of seeing and knowing. It is not a power of action. Can you see where this is going? Consciousness is a faculty of knowing, and it's not associated with a faculty of acting. That's where we're going to arrive in just a few minutes. So first metaphor is eyesight. Second metaphor, we get two drishtantas here. What are they? American slang, 2 for the price of 1. How's that? I like these. I'm thinking about all of our viewers, students from all over the world. So you get to learn a little bit of our American lingo. 2 for the price of 1. Here, second metaphor, manasi evam. Evam in the same way, manasi for the mind, buddhao, and for the intellect, na staha. Those actions don't belong to, in fact, those actions, any actions, don't belong to the mind, manas, and buddhi, intellect. Why? Prakashataha, because the mind and buddhi are also instruments of knowing, not instruments of acting. But you can see the confusion that comes. So your eyes are instruments of knowing, but when they get connected with prana, then your eyes open and close. But that action is not associated with the eyes. It's due to prana. Similarly, your mind and intellect are instruments of knowing. Instruments, indriya is the Sanskrit term. They're instruments of knowing. They're not instruments of acting. But when the mind and buddhi get connected with prana, you can do amazing things. You can say, arm go up, arm go down. Motion. Now you can, definitely the motion is commanded by the mind and intellect, but it's The motion itself, the action itself, is due to prana. This is the point. So when prana gets associated with the eyes, they seem to act, but they don't really act. When prana gets associated with the mind and intellect, it seems to act, but it doesn't truly act. And the point here is it's that combination when you throw prana into the mixture, so to speak. So this is the basis now for the Darshtanta, which wouldn't make any sense if we took it first, which is why I took the verses in reverse order. So back to 19. Atma buddhi manas chakshur, Atma buddhi manas chakshur, alokartari sankarat, alokartari sankarat, bhrantasyaratma karmeti, bhrantasyaratma karmeti, kriyanam sannipatataha, kriyanam sannipatataha. Excuse me. All right. So here, prior verse, we talked about the combination of prana with the eyes, or prana with the mind and intellect. Here, what is the combination that makes Atma seem like a human being who walks and talks and jumps and does all kinds of silly things? It's another combination. Combination here, Atma buddhi manas chakshur aloka artari, etc. So he gives 6 factors. The first Atma, this will, unless you've studied Bhagavad Gita and other scriptures, you'll be surprised here. Atma means body. It does sometimes, rarely, not rarely, occasionally. Atma refers to body. How do you know? Context and with the help of a commentary. So both from context and commentary, we know here that Atma means body. So you have a combination of one body plus one buddhi, intellect, plus one manas, one mind, plus 5 chakshus. Why would I say 5? You got 2 eyes. Chakshus represents the 5 senses: sight, hearing, taste, smell, and touch. So all 5 are suggested by that one word, chakshus. And then aloka, light. If you have eyes but you don't have light, so there are external factors also involved. And also artha, an object. If there's no object to be seen, nothing happens. But when you put all of these factors together, things happen. What happens? 2 things. One is knowing. In the case of the eyes see what's going on. But in the second case, you put all those factors together here, and you get motion, activity, action, intentional action. And Shankara wants to make here a point, Bhranta Hisyat. That is an erroneous conclusion. If you want to attribute all of that action to Atma, you've made a mistake. Just as the eyes became agents of action due to prana, just as the mind and intellect became agents of action due to prana, in the same way, Atma becomes an agent of action only due to the proximity. We've used that word here before. Due to the proximity of all these other factors, beginning with the body, mind, intellect, etc. So he says, for this reason, Atma karma iti, that Atma seems to be the agent of action due to, in the last class we used that word superimposition, adhyasa. That's our topic once again. We superimpose characteristics which belong to your mind, body, etc., which are capable of actions. We superimpose all that on Atma. That is superimposition, adhyasa. So all of that atma karma iti kriyanam. Atma is considered the agent kriyanam of all these actions. Why? Sannipatataha. Actually, I'm looking at my translation. Interaction is fine, but rather sannipata is like throwing things together. It's like if you're cooking and you throw a lot of things in. Better metaphor. You're cooking and you throw a lot of things in a mixie, and then they get all mixed up. That's what the first half of the verse is about. All these different factors get combined, and that then leads to the wrong conclusion that Atma is an agent of action. Also, this combination is responsible for a really confusing question that's asked in satsang again and again and again, and that is, who gets enlightened? Now, look at the connection to this. Who gets enlightened is a question that comes frequently. Atma, as you know, doesn't get enlightened because Atma is nitya shuddha buddha mukta svabhava. Atma is eternally free. Atma never got into a state of bondage in the first place. That compound is a famous statement of Sri Shankara. And then body and mind are inert stuff. Inert stuff doesn't get liberated. It's inert stuff. It's just stuff. And before liberation, it's just stuff. After liberation, it's just stuff. Both physical stuff and subtle stuff, sthula and sukshma. So then, who gets liberated? And this is that complex question, which has a complex answer. And that is, the one who gets liberated is a combination. You can't say it's this or that. It's this and that. It's Atma in the presence of the body and mind who becomes a living being, a jiva. So this is people struggle with this because it's complex. Whenever you have combinations of things, you have complexity. Think about your car. How many parts are inside of your car? Do you think you could understand how your car works? I don't. And nowadays, your car probably has half a dozen computers in it to make it even more complex. So this is my point. Wherever you have these combinations, you have complexity, which means we have to be more discerning. That kind of discernment, in Sanskrit we call it viveka, and that's one of the real core practice. We can call it a practice of viveka, a practice of discernment, where you can't just look at things in a superficial way. You have to think about it, because looking at things in a superficial way leads to confusion. The eyes blink, the mind moves, and Atma is engaged in action. All of these are wrong conclusions that arise through conventional, superficial thinking. So Vedanta goes beyond that conventional thinking. All right, so 19 and 20 we just did in reverse order. This topic ends with one more verse. Sankalpadhyavasayautu Sankalpadhyavasayautu Mano buddhyor yatha kramat Mano buddhyor yatha kramat Netare taradharmatvam Netare taradharmatvam Sarvam chatmani kalpitam Sarvam chatmani kalpitam. Start in the second line. Mano buddhyoho. For the manas, mind, and buddhi, intellect, there are qualities. What are those qualities? In the first line, sankalpa, actually the term usually comes sankalpa and vikalpa. The idea of making understanding in one way is sankalpa, understanding in another way is vikalpa. So this is considered to be characteristics of the mind, as opposed to adhyavasaya, which is ascertainment. Clear ascertainment is attributed to the buddhi. This is the very conventional definition that's been used since the time of Shankara, and I find it personally awkward. You know, usually they'll say that the mind is one that fluctuates. You think it's like this, you think it's like that, and the buddhi is that which has very clear ascertainment. It's like this. And that's been the conventional way of analyzing manas and buddhi. Of course, it's really one organ. Antakarana is one faculty. But that faculty has different aspects. So then we chop up that faculty. It's sometimes in a twofold way, sometimes in a fourfold way, including chitta, memory, and ahankara, ego. But it's really one faculty, one indriya, and we call it antakarana. So one faculty that we analyze in various ways. When we do this twofold analysis, this analysis that we just saw seems to me very old-fashioned. Psychology has come a long way, starting with Freud 150 years ago or so, and leading up to modern times. So we have so much more refined psychological tools today. So for that reason, I generally give a very different definition, which is consistent with this, but sounds very different. And what you may have heard me say this before, how to distinguish between manas and buddhi. What you've heard me say before is buddhi includes all intentional mental activities, as opposed to manas, which is all unintentional mental activities. It's consistent with this definition, but I think it's much more helpful. Intentional is what you choose to think about, where you direct your mind, the portion of your mind that is under your willful control. But so many things that happen in our mind are not under our control. Emotions, we've had this discussion before. Can you really control your emotions? This is the most, and I just want to point this out because it's one of the biggest confusions. If you think you can control your emotions, for the next 5 seconds, be really angry. Ready? Start. And so instead of angry, you're giggling. So what is that? What that means, it's just a simple example to show that we really don't control our emotions. The idea is we should control how we respond to our emotions. We can't control them directly, but we must control how we respond to the emotions. So, okay. Whatever you can control, buddhi. Things that you can't control, like emotions. How about perception? Seeing actually takes place in your mind, right? With your eyes open and looking at me, can you choose not to see me? So that's another good example of a mental activity that you have no direct control over. So those activities we attribute to manas. So this is an updated version of making this distinction between manas and buddhi. And Sri Shankara says he abides with this old-fashioned division. So sankalpa, belongs to the manas, mind, and adhyavasaya belongs to the buddhi, intellect. He says, na itaretara dharmatvam, but not in the reverse order. So don't mix them up. So intentional thinking belongs to the buddhi, and unintentional thinking belongs to manas. And he says that, sorry, I'm a little, anyway. Sarvam cha atmani kalpitam. All actions, deliberate and non-intentional, are ultimately under the command of your body, of your mind and intellect. So intentional actions, like talking, unintentional actions, we just talked about one. Blinking your eyes, right? You don't choose, oh, it's time to blink my eyes now. It's automatic. So that would be an example of an unintentional action. We can say the intentional actions are using this ancient worldview. Intentional actions are controlled by your buddhi. Unintentional actions like blinking your eyes is controlled by your manas. And all of those actions are kalpitam. Sarvam kalpitam. All of those actions are kalpitam, superimposed. It has other meanings in other contexts. Here it means superimposed. Projected is fine. They are superimposed atmani, on oneself. And this is the Shankara concludes this topic here, saying that all actions involve other aspects of your being. The sthula aspects, the sukshma aspects, subtle aspects. The physical and subtle bodies are engaged in action, but all of those actions are wrongly superimposed on Atma. Now it's time for an important question. This is more of an American question than a Sanskrit question. And the question is, so what? Really, this is, Shankara's made this highly philosophical point that Atma is not an agent of action. So we should ask, so what? What is the consequence of that? What's the importance of it? And he himself doesn't discuss it here. It's discussed elsewhere. But he himself doesn't discuss it here. So let's briefly answer that question, so what? I can think offhand, there are many reasons. Offhand, I can think of at least 3 reasons it's highly consequential that Atma is not an agent of action. First reason, if Atma is an agent of action, then Atma owns all the karma of all the actions you've ever committed in all the lifetimes you've lived. And after enlightenment, if Atma really is the agent of action, whatever is enlightenment won't remove Atma from reaping the results of those actions in the future, which means there's no way to establish freedom from rebirth as a result of enlightenment if Atma is the agent. So that's one reason. And you may say, oh, who cares about rebirth? That's not really our focus in Advaita Vedanta. So then a second reason, and I think a more significant reason, if Atma is not an agent of action, you don't have to do anything. And first of all, you can't do anything, right? And therefore, you're not responsible to do anything. This sounds a little fuzzy, so let me try to explain. Prior to enlightenment, you're likely to feel a burden of responsibility. Oh, I have to do this, I have to do this, I have to do this. Most people feel that. After enlightenment, you know that I am not an agent of action, If I am not an agent of action, I don't have to do this. I don't have to do that. I don't have to do that. It means complete freedom from that sense of doesn't mean you become irresponsible. Please don't misunderstand me. That's not the point. The inner experience is one, in fact, a nice word that comes in Bhagavad Gita, naishkarmyam. Naishkarmyam is a state of actionlessness. An enlightened person is one who enjoys the state of naishkarmyam, actionlessness, which means you don't feel that sense of responsibility. Nothing needs to be done. Of course, body and mind continue to be engaged in all of these activities, but the sense of freedom is present inside for the enlightened person. They don't feel or experience that responsibility of doing anything. That is the condition called naishkarmyam, actionlessness. And one more. This is a little bit, you can say it's academic, but it ends up being crucial to the teachings of Vedanta. You all know the ultimate teaching of Vedanta, tat tvamasi. At one level, tat means Brahman, and tvam means Atma. Now here's the problem. If Atma is an agent of action, and Brahman isn't, then tat tvam asi. Tvam, you, asi, are atat. You are not that. Or we could say tat tvam nasi. You are not that. So the only way it's possible for Atma to be identical to Brahman is for Atma to be a non-agent of action. You can say that's a very academic or scholarly observation, but you can also see how it's central to the teachings of Vedanta. Both are true. Okay. So with that, we end this topic on the Atma not being an agent of action. This is verse 21. And I'll just introduce the next verse. Notice we jump from verse 21 to verse 30. So, what did you miss out on? What you missed out on was a hair-splitting analysis of Shunyavada and Kshanika Vijnanavada. Let me just give you an overview. We're not going to go through Shankara's analysis, but let me give you an overview of what these two doctrines are about. They're both obviously Buddhist doctrines, but I'd like to give you a little insight here, since actually we come back in the verses we're skipping. Shankara analyzes those doctrines. But starting with verse 30, where we pick up the thread, he gives a Vedantic response to those two doctrines. So we should understand what are those two doctrines so we can understand Shankara's response. Again, I'll stay with all Roman letters. Shunyavada. Vada is a philosophical term for, I think doctrine would probably be the most accurate translation. It just literally means what you say. So Vada here, a doctrine or a teaching about shunya. Shunya means non-existence, complete, utter non-existence. So this is a Buddhist doctrine that for the world there is no underlying reality. You've heard in our classes again and again and again and again that Brahman is the underlying reality because of which the world exists. We have that particular teaching because it has its roots in the Vedas and the Upanishads. The Buddhists reject the authority of the Vedas and Upanishads, so they don't have that advantage. All they have is pure logic. So by using pure logic, the best they can do is negate. And they do it brilliantly. They negate and negate and negate, but they can never grasp an underlying reality because of which everything exists. So we could say the Shunyavada, a doctrine that there is shunya here, no underlying reality because of which everything exists. So we could say in general, this is a doctrine that rejects Brahman. Then we come to the other. Here, vijnana has different meanings in different contexts. Here it means consciousness. In this context, vijnana means consciousness. Kshanika means that which is momentary. So kshanika vijnana refers to momentary consciousness. Some translators like to call it flickers of consciousness. And what that goes contrary to Vedanta's teaching that consciousness is unchanging. In Advaita Vedanta, we understand consciousness to be your true self, unchanging consciousness, present before your birth, present after your death, and while you're alive, completely unchanging. So this Kshanika Vijnana Vada is I want to move, when I'm too close to that speaker, it gets echoey in here. I got to stand in the, okay. So, where Vedanta says that consciousness is unchanging and permanent. In fact, in our Bhagavad Gita, in our Uddhava Gita class yesterday, we said the same consciousness which reveals your waking state, dream state, and deep sleep state, it's the same consciousness that revealed your waking, dream, and sleep states when you were 5 years old, and 10 years old, and 25 years old, and so forth. So continuity of self is an important teaching of Advaita Vedanta. The very word kshanika vijnana is negating that continuity. It's actually, from a Vedantic standpoint, we would say it's actually referring to our minds. And our minds are one thought followed by another thought, followed by another thought. So this constant flow of thoughts is the Buddhists take as who you are. Atma, to these kshanika vijnana vadans, Atma is this flow of I. And according to them, after I disappears, it comes back again. It goes away, it comes back again. It goes away. So they're describing a mental phenomenon of as though pulsating I, but when it pulsates fast enough, it looks continuous. You know that's how television works, right? What you're watching is 30 images each second on the TV. But these images come so quickly, it seems continuous. So according to these Buddhists, because these flickers of consciousness come so quickly, it seems continuous. So for this reason, we could say that kshanika vijnana vada negates Atma. So where Shunyavada, we can understand as negating Brahman, we can say this kshanika vijnana vada negates Atma. Now, then let me get back here. All right. then in that sequence of verses we just skipped, 22 to 29, Shankara analyzes both of these, and he starts to show internal inconsistencies in those doctrines. And that's the reason we're choosing not to study them, is in order to understand internal consistencies, you really need to understand the doctrines very deeply. Shankara assumes that those studying this text have already studied those. So we are choosing to skip over that, but then we come now to Shankara's response, a Vedantic response to both Shunyavada and Kshanika Vijnanavada. That response starts in verse 30 and goes on for a while. 34. Say at least up to 36. So anyway, the response is quite extensive. So I think we'll just see the first verse of the response today. Mrishadhyasastu yatra syat, mrishadhyasastu yatra syat, tannashastatra no mataha, tannashastatra no mataha, sarvanasho bhavet yasya, sarvanasho bhavet yasya, mokshas kasya phalam vada, moksha kasya phalam vada. Start in the second half. Sarvanashaha bhavet. If you contend that sarvanashaha, nasha means destruction, and destruction of everything, that nasha is not quite the right word. Shankara used it just because it's only 2 syllables. But what he's actually talking about is not destruction, but negation. Sarva nashaha bhavet. If there is the negation of everything. So we have clear reference to Shunyavada is negation of everything in the sense that if clay doesn't exist, then what is in my hand doesn't truly exist. There's an appearance, but it's a mere appearance. Notice that's not quite, it's close to Vedanta, but not quite. And so in Vedanta, we would say it's not mere appearance because you can fill it with water and drink from it. So that's not a mere illusion or appearance. We use the word mitya for that. Buddhism takes it a step further. So no, there's no clay. Therefore, it's only appearance. And of course, then they will go on and say, you only apparently put water in it. And you only apparently... They turn the whole thing into mere illusion, which is a little counterintuitive. You don't have the illusion of drinking water. It's an experience. It's as real as it seems. Not absolutely real, but we call it relative reality, vyavaharika satta. So this is a distinction we make in Advaita Vedanta for the, and we say that vyavaharika satta, relative reality, exists because of paramartika satta, and underlying reality. So the Vedantic worldview is this pot is a relative existence whose existence depends on clay. The Buddhist take on it would be this pot is a mere appearance which has no underlying reality at all. This is the Buddhist point of view, and just as if the pot has no underlying reality, it's mere appearance. If the world has no underlying reality, it is mere appearance. That's what the term sarvanasha means. You end up with nothing. Shunya means nothing. By the way, shunya is the name for the number 0 in Sanskrit. Many of you know that. So what do you have? Zero. Zero vada. That doesn't quite sound right, but that's basically what it means. It's a teaching that everything is zero. So now Shankara's point here is sarvanasha bhavet. If that's true, if that's your position, then yasya kasya, for a person, moksha palam, how can there be moksha? I'm sorry, kasya, for whom can there be moksha? If there is no underlying reality, then for whom can there be liberation, which is a phala, which is a fruit of these teachings? The point is, if the world doesn't exist, if the world is mere appearance, what does it say about you? Mere appearance. So then, if world is merely an appearance, illusion, if you are merely an appearance, an illusion, then who gets moksha? Now, remember that Buddhism also has their version of moksha as a goal. They call it nirvana, but it's a condition of liberation. So Vedanta and Buddhism are together on many, many topics. So both Vedanta and Buddhism speak of freedom from suffering and freedom from rebirth. We can call that moksha, which is the phala, the fruit of both the Buddhist teachings and the Vedantic teachings. But if you ascribe to this shunyavada, kasya mokshaha, who is left to get liberated? Because no one exists in the first place. No one gets liberated. So this is Shankara's argument. Kasya palam. What possible benefit then is there in any kind of spiritual pursuit? He says, vada. Tell me what benefit can there be? Now, having said that, he now, in the first half, which we're taking second, he gives the more Vedantic perspective. He shows the defect of the Buddhist perspective in the second half, and he's going to show how Vedanta is free from that defect in the first half, where he says, Mrisha adhyasahatu yatra syat. But in Vedanta, where we consider mrisha adhyasa, false superimposition, identification with your body and mind is false superimposition, right? So, and tannashaha, and the destruction, the removal of that false identification with your body, mind. Tatra naha mataha. This is our contention. This is our teaching. Tatra, with regard to moksha, that moksha is possible through the removal of false superimposition. False superimposition is a fancy technical term that really refers to identification with your body and mind and everything else. So, as we've discussed in many classes, identification with your body and mind causes suffering. And freedom from suffering comes when you remove that identification with your body and mind. But now there's one more step. Because if I just tell you, you suffer, it'll give you a little bit of neo-Vedanta. They would put it like this. You suffer because you're identified with your body and mind. So stop it. Well, it doesn't quite work like that. because this identification is not willful. It's not, you're not doing it on purpose, so to speak, but it is the result of, to use my guru's words, self-non-recognition. Only when there is self-non-recognition, only then can you identify with your body and mind. If you were so clear that your true nature is sat-chit-ananda atma, then you wouldn't identify with your body and mind. So when Shankara says here, moksha is gained in Advaita Vedanta through removal of this identification, there's one more step. He hasn't mentioned it here, but that step is that the removal of identification is the result of discovering your true nature as Sat-chit-ananda Atma. Okay. That is a good place to stop today. When we continue next week, we'll see him continuing to respond both to Shunyavada and Kshanika Vijnanavada. We'll see the Vedantic responses. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramaya Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschad Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat. Very good.